He started his career with J. Edgar Hoover. He continues it with the town of Surfside Beach. You'll meet him coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at the Myrtle Beach Herald. We're focused on the town of Surfside Beach and its Director of Public Safety, Clyde Merryman. Good morning, Clyde.
How are you today?
Thanks so much for coming in.
Pleasure's mine.
So excited to get you in on a Friday morning to think about so many activities. You never know what a weekend's going to be like and how you're going to be put on your toes or forced to take off. I mean, where you're thinking you're relaxing over the weekend and something big happens. You just never know when you're going to be busy.
That is correct. You never know, and we're pretty much always on duty or ready to leap into action, as I tell my guys pretty regularly. So we're a very reactive occupation by the very definition.
You have to be that way all the time. You know, it was Tom O'Dare, our editor at the Herald, who said, this Clyde Merryman, this guy you need to get on the show. He's been saying that for a while. I hate to say it. It took me this long to give you a call, but there's so many things going on, as you know, in this community, whether it's our viewers in Laurinburg or Lumberton or the PD area, or here in Horry and Georgetown County, and the commitment of just finding so many things going on. There's always a lot.
Well, the beach is a hustling and bustling community, and the Grand Strand has grown so much. And in my lifetime, I started out in the Grand Strand when I was probably about 5 years old with relatives in Conway, and I've watched it grow. And it's an amazing place today compared to what it used to be.
Yeah.
Some of it's good and some of it's not.
That's right. We won't touch that side. You know, it's funny when I saw you had sent something to me just trying to fill me in a little bit on your background and saw that you'd written Myrtle Beach and Conway. And, of course, you know, so many folks hear about traveling and visiting the beach. They think about, oh, they've got to be coming down to Myrtle Beach. But you've been coming to Conway since an early age. Yeah,
my aunt and uncle lived in Conway, and my first cousins, who were really like my brothers and sisters. And we came over literally from Tennessee. We came over every summer. It was a ritual with us. And like I said, I've watched the place grow. It's an incredible story.
It is amazing. You've traveled all over, Clyde.
Yes, I have.
You've really been all over. It was fascinating reading a little bit about that. And, of course, one of the more exciting aspects is learning a little bit this morning, if you're willing to share a little about the inside as well as the outside perceptions of your 37 years of service to the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
When I was 20 years old, I got interested in the Bureau. I was in Nashville, and I went up to Washington, D.C., moved up there, and took a job with the FBI as a clerk, as we called ourselves in those days.
Clerk.
I worked at nights. I went to school during the day while I earned an accounting degree. And then when I graduated, Mr. Hoover was still the director, J. Edgar Hoover, and quite an interesting experience for 4 years. And then upon my graduation, I, of course, like everyone else, applied for the agent position, was accepted, and went through the FBI Academy, graduated from that. And then I spent about the next 33 years of my life, where the Bureau sent me, basically, which was initially Cleveland, Ohio, then Youngstown, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, did some work in Chicago. Quite an experience for a Tennessee boy.
Yeah.
Then I was very fortunate to get back to my native state in Knoxville, Tennessee, worked in East Tennessee, did work in Charlotte, did work in Miami, Oklahoma City, Dallas, Houston, a lot of different places. Then, rather late in my career, I stuck up my hand and volunteered for a supervisory position at FBI headquarters. I spent 4 years there from 95 through 98. And then while I was there, facing retirement eventually, I bought a home here, what was always considered my second home, the Grand Strand. And in 99, I was lucky. It wasn't my plan, but I was very lucky that there was an opening in the Myrtle Beach office. And I came down here in 99, and I worked for 4 years until I retired last year in March of 2003. And my retirement was mandatory. I was 57 years old, and that's mandatory retirement.
That's the age. Is that right?
Yeah. And it's a younger person's organization, and I agree with that. So after so many years, I had some concerns about retiring. I mean, it was me. It was who I was. And then, as I've told a number of friends, in my last year, I came to a great peace with the fact of retirement, and in fact, look forward to it. And I had actually intended to retire in December. And we had the tragedy of the Alice Donovan kidnapping in Conway and her murder, and which has been highly publicized. And one of my bosses actually asked me if I would stick around 3 more months to help with that, and then to transition 2 agents that they were bringing in. So I actually ended up working a few more months than I intended to.
So is that common that and I guess because there were some interstate issues there as to how the FBI, I mean, are they commonly brought in on murder?
Well, first of all, it was soon recognized to be a carjacking and a kidnapping, which are both federal statutes. And there's a misunderstanding about this 24 hours and all of this other stuff. I think that goes back into history or somewhere. But basically, as soon as anyone hears about a kidnapping, the FBI offers its services to the local law enforcement agencies. You know, we don't want to sit around worrying about a 24-hour deadline when somebody's life is at stake.
Right.
And we had heard these fellows had escaped from prison up in Indiana, as I recall. So we had a fugitive investigation going on them in the FBI, not realizing they were in our area, of course, initially. So it started as a fugitive investigation, and then that spread to a carjacking, kidnapping, and so forth. So yeah, there's a number of statutes in there that would give the Bureau jurisdiction. Along with, we worked with Conway Police Department, Horry County PD. Right. It was a total partnership, as it almost always is these days. It's rare that we do anything alone.
It is amazing when you think about that, when you're talking about 24/7. I mean, you're thinking about an entire aspect. But of course, in an instance like today, Director of Public Safety for a town of Surfside Beach, you're primarily thinking about a territorial position. You're thinking about an area, for the most part, I suspect, as opposed to an instance like that where you're really thinking about a gigantic territory and so many things that would happen in a very large area.
I tell some of my friends it's been an interesting change for me, because literally the Bureau has moved into a war. When I came in the Bureau, it was interstate. Now we're international.
Right.
And before I left the agency, there were just numerous opportunities to go all over the world on specific assignments. I was too old to care about that, frankly. It had passed me. Now I'm in Surfside Beach, and it's a small venue, but the responsibilities are the same. It's just that the venue's smaller.
Right.
And of course, I want to stress that we've got a tremendous interactive law enforcement community here in the Myrtle Beach area, in the Grand Strand, Horry and Georgetown, and we have police and fire chiefs associations, and most of our cases are joint cases now. So while I might be over the public safety department in a smaller community, and Warren Gall and Sam Hendricks over the police departments in Conway, and Johnny Morgan for Horry County, we all work together so closely, and the same is true on the fire side.
Absolutely.
So a crime that occurs in Surfside Beach, for example, generally will have some aspect of it that impacts Horry County or Conway or Myrtle Beach, and sometimes Atlanta and Charlotte.
That's exactly right. It was fascinating seeing how when you click on, I visited the FBI.gov site last night or earlier this morning. You think about so many of the offices throughout the country, and as you say, now those aspects throughout the world. But I think they call them legat or
legats.
Forgive me. That's right. A little slow there, but that aspect of locations around the world, and of course so many of other, as you say, branching out into positions, actually having folks stationed in Myrtle Beach, as opposed to when you click on the state of South Carolina, it says everything flows through Columbia, or North Carolina, everything flows through Charlotte. Right. But I suspect really branching out in other areas is
what the Bureau has is 56 field offices, and Columbia is a field office, and Charlotte's a field office. Right. And then each one of these field offices have small satellite offices that we call resident agencies, which is what Myrtle Beach is. And that's usually, it could be anywhere from 3 or 4 or 5 agents up to 25 or 30, depending on the size of the town. And of course, we cover all of the states that way. And then we report, the Bureau is a centralized organization. And then we report all of our work through our command staff in Columbia, in this case, and then in turn up to FBI headquarters.
Clyde, you've got family here in the area.
I do. I've got, my aunt and uncle are deceased.
Okay.
And then actually the family that I have right now is pretty distant. My 2 first cousins are both married. One is in Anderson, South Carolina, and the other one, my female cousin, Sandra, married a young man from out of state, and she's living in North Carolina. Got a lot of close friends still in the Conway area that go back to my past.
Right. Do you get back to Tennessee much?
Yes, I've got a son and 2 granddaughters in Knoxville, and then I have a daughter in Atlanta, and I have a grandson. So I go to Atlanta and Knoxville. I love living here. The beach is a wonderful place to live, and sometimes I stay in a little bit of hot water with my children, because who are adults, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't go back to see them as much as they would like.
Well, I'm sure they want to come down here and visit
Although
you.
I don't have any
Knoxville
problem.
and Atlanta have no beaches that I'm aware of.
That's right. I don't have any problem getting them here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exciting. That is exciting. When you think about 37 years of service and going in, as you said, as a clerk.
Correct.
And, of course, with J. Edgar Hoover at the helm at that time, that must have been exciting.
It was a really interesting time, and Mr. Hoover, correctly so, built the FBI that we still see today. And he was a very strict individual, as were those times. And young people today in the work environment would have a hard time dealing with the rigidity that existed, not only in the FBI, but in corporate America and so forth. And there's no question it shaped me, and it as it did all of us. Those of us that are still left that consider ourselves Hoover agents. It was a wonderful experience for me.
And he ended his tenure there in '72.
He died at home in office, and at that time I was in Ohio.
So you have vivid memories of him working there. I mean, having joined in the mid-'60s, and of course so many things going on. I think you had written about some of the experiences there with the D.C. riots in the '60s, as well as some of the...
Yeah, I was there, and of course the '60s were a tough time for people that didn't live through that, and you had the civil rights, you had the war protests going on, and a lot of other things. And of course Washington, D.C. is a magnet if people want to manifest their passions, right, and so forth. So it was very difficult times. Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis, and there were riots nationwide following that, very tragically. And we were in the buildings, and it was an amazing learning experience for a young man from Tennessee, and a tragic time in our country, actually.
Do you ever share with folks some of your vivid memories, or when you lay out, I'm sure in so many different locations, and you talk about being in locations, and obviously amazing names that pop up. I know surely with some of the issues in Chicago when you were there, I'm sure there's some big aspects of that. But even having started in the Bureau in the mid-'60s, seeing so many facets of the Bureau change, and we sure want to talk about that a little bit. Are there memories that just stick out in your mind that are irascible memories that you just never free up?
Well, there's so many, and it'd be hard, almost difficult to try to pick and choose after so many years. I was involved in, most of my career was actually on the criminal side of the house with drugs and organized crime, that sort of thing, in Detroit and Cleveland. As you would expect, organized crime was very prevalent. And I literally saw the agency go from when Congress first enacted real organized crime legislation, which the Bureau never had, and I saw the Bureau leap into the fray against organized crime and start literally from the grassroots, excuse me, and to where we are today, where we're making incredible headway fighting organized crime and taking out entire families. And I saw it in days where our progress was very small. I was in Detroit when Jimmy Hoffa was kidnapped, and there were the president of the Teamster Union. And we were aware of the conflicts going on between the Teamsters Union and La Cosa Nostra, the mafia at that time. It was widely publicized, and we were working it. We did a lot of surveillances. Ironically, the day he was kidnapped, we weren't surveilling some of the people that we think were involved in his kidnapping. And you sit back and you think, well, geez, if we had gone out on this surveillance versus that surveillance, we might have been there when they kidnapped that man, and maybe he would be alive today. There's been so many things. You move up to the tragedies of Waco and Ruby Ridge in recent times, where we've had to go in where other agencies have had difficulties, and we've had to go in and support them when a difficult situation was already there. And the Bureau's face has changed immensely. We went through civil rights. We went through the war on organized crime, which, of course, we're still doing. The Bureau is still doing. And then we've gone to the war on drugs. And I was very active in that, both as an agent and as an undercover agent. And now we're doing, now our responsibility is the war on terrorism. And I have no doubt that men and women of the Bureau are stepping up to the plate every day, as they always do, and giving it their very best.
Obviously, for viewers or for normal folks in the community, we perceive, other than when the FBI arrives on the scene of or after a crime, you see FBI jackets, but everything we imagine is probably pretty much behind closed doors, is all occurring, not out in the open. You're not necessarily seeing folks. You're not seeing a badge or a gun on somebody.
Right.
Really a lot of activities. In living in a world like that where folks wouldn't know who you were when you walked into a room, or as you said, fighting organized crime, surely a heck of a lot had to be. And organized crime is for real, Clyde. I mean, there is such thing as the mafia. I mean, for Southerners, I think oftentimes they have difficulty gauging that, but in the Northeast, it's pretty well understood in other areas of the country.
I had been involved in an assignment for probably close to 2 years, and one of my closest friends is a person that was extremely close to me until the investigation broke. Didn't have a clue as to what I was doing, and literally read about it in the newspaper years ago. And generally, the Bureau doesn't. We talk about within the Bureau and within the other agencies that we're working with, of course, very open. Mm-hmm. But it is a bit of a clandestine environment. And yet, there's a lot of things that we do public. I mean, we wear, generally, unless you're undercover, you wear a coat and tie to work every day, and you go in and you push paper and you talk to people. And dealing with people is probably the most important thing that the Bureau does, and winning the trust of the public and getting people to take confidence in us, because that's where we get our information, and that's what drives everything we do.
Mm-hmm. How about the Central Intelligence Agency, just from y'all's view, looking at a body like that? Did you all communicate well together? Was there a lot of camaraderie, or what are they exactly? Just a quick plot summary for a viewer who may not understand.
First of all, generally the FBI works inside the United States, although I've told you our role has changed, and it's changing. And the CIA traditionally has worked outside the United States by the way it was created.
Right.
The CIA does not have criminal investigative responsibilities, which of course the Bureau has criminal as well as foreign counterintelligence and terrorism. And I have always disputed what I've heard in the media in recent years, that there's this disconnect between the FBI and CIA. I was at FBI headquarters, I mentioned, 4 years, and Louis Freeh was the director at the time. Director Freeh was over at CIA headquarters routinely. The head of the CIA, George Tenet, was in our building constantly. We had FBI supervisors like myself assigned in CIA headquarters every day, as we did at the DEA. The problem is, if something slips through the cracks, and unfortunately it's always the mistake that manifests itself.
Right.
So really the communication is a lot better than sometimes is portrayed.
That's important to know, and I appreciate you saying that. And that's a great plot summary. Their work's being done outside of the country. I printed off from that website some of the FBI priorities, particularly in 2003 and 2004. Number one, protecting the U.S. from terrorist attacks. Number two, protect the U.S. against foreign intelligence and other things. Those are things you would think about some other body really doing. Or when did, obviously 9/11 caused a heck of a lot of that. When did those jump so dramatically? What during your tenure was the big focus?
Well, and again, during my career, there was fairly much of an equal focus between what we called FCI, foreign counterintelligence, now it's terrorism and so forth, and the criminal side of the house. But you didn't hear much about it because most of what they did was extremely clandestine. They worked closely with the CIA. It was covert. It wasn't things that ended up in federal court and got media attention. Since 9/11, there's an immense focus, of course, on the Bureau's responsibilities, and they have dramatically changed because for the first time in our history, our nation, continental United States, has come under attack from a foreign enemy. And the Bureau's always had that responsibility. In my career, we've known for many years, as it's been known throughout the federal government, that we were being targeted by extremists, primarily from the Middle East.
Right.
And frankly, generally, the talk around Washington was not, would we get hit, but when we'd get hit. And we're such an open society, and when you think about it, you can't be, and I love the openness of our America, our nation, and that's one of the vulnerabilities that we have, to have this wonderful open society that people can come in and attack us. And we learned from that, and we haven't had that happen since then, thank God.
Right. I think you'd said prior to 9/11 a big focus would be fighting white-collar crime.
White-collar crime, organized crime, public corruption, those were major. And again, that was on the criminal side of the house.
Correct.
While we were doing all that, and I was a criminal agent, the other side of the FBI was working very diligently every day. It just didn't get any attention or focus. They were out there doing their jobs, And frankly, they did a pretty good job up until 911.
And continue to do it today.
Yes,
absolutely.
sir. Sure do.
Do you mind sharing with viewers the 10 years in FBI's undercover program? We got about 6 or 7 minutes, and I know time's flying, Clyde, and there's a number of other things to talk about. But that aspect of posing in another role, if you're comfortable sharing a little bit about what's that like, kind of living a different life, not a Jekyll and Hyde, but posing in something that you're not.
Well, after Mr. Hoover's death, the Bureau's undercover program really got started, and I just happened to be on one of the young, aggressive agents, and I got in. I was one of the premier first undercover agents in what was considered the first class, the first group, and of course we literally learned as we went, because it was a totally new program, a new way of doing things, and so it was what the Bureau does is this. The Bureau does long-term undercover operations. So what we would do is we would find a crime problem, let's say here in Myrtle Beach. We would bring an agent in from the outside. We might set up a business, and this is public information. We might set up a business front. The guy comes in. Almost no one knows he's an FBI agent. He might have one person, literally one contact agent in the Bureau, and his assignment is it might have been a car theft ring. It might have been a drug organization. It might have been sadly, a crooked sheriff or law enforcement official that was protecting a drug operation and so forth. And we would generally work undercover for a year or two. That was pretty normal. And then we would come out, arrest people, prosecute the case, and then go back undercover again.
Wow.
And the most important thing is that we worked alone. We never had backup, almost never. Very dangerous, but again, by the grace of God, and good common sense at times, we got all of the agents got through it. We've had some horror stories about agents being taken to warehouses and beaten up, and a friend of mine in Atlanta, Georgia, literally bailed out of a car on a rural road one night where the bad guys were taking him to kill him after they'd beaten him up. Could have happened to any one of us, but again, thank God it didn't. It's a great program, and it's a big part of my life. It was you do change your identity, you become someone else. I was raised in a very conservative Christian home in Nashville, Tennessee, and then I found myself in Detroit and Miami and Charlotte and a lot of other places, posing as everything from a drug dealer to a pimp to a mover of stolen cars, and you do have to become that person.
Wow. I just can't fathom how it's done. I can't imagine. And I guess you couldn't have in your childhood have imagined that I'll be posing as a drug dealer, as a pimp, or as a car theft.
Not to belabor the point, but I will say that the people who know me today in my white shirt and the way I'm looking today can't imagine me back then. The people who knew me then can't imagine me today. It's funny. I get that a lot.
You mentioned we just got a couple of minutes, Clyde. You mentioned by the grace of God, and obviously in writing about yourself a little bit, church has become a big focus, or has maintained or remained a big focus. When you're posing as a drug dealer or as a pimp, you still had to find a way to get to church or communicate with your God.
That was a period of my life that was a difficult time period, and that's not any fault of the FBI or anything like that. And God is a great source of strength to me personally in Jesus Christ. And I've had an interesting life, and I can relate to President Bush, who said he had his wild and crazy days, and I've had mine, and that's part of my Christian testament. And but I got through that, and I am I'm not one of these people that tries to wear it out or anything, but God's got me through some very difficult times in life, and I'm very grateful for that.
In a couple of minutes, you think about, there was a big aspect, and I know obviously with Veterans Day last Thursday, the 11th, you think of so many aspects in life, and the U.S. military's intervention and rollover in Iraq or in other areas. When you looked at that from the FBI perspective or Clyde Merryman perspective, how did you perceive that?
Well, I did. In fact, that week I looked at that. My dad was in World War II in Germany, and my mom was actually helping build airplane parts in Nashville, kind of the Rosie the Riveter. And sometimes, there's a lot of, and I'm not saying this politically, but there's a lot of controversy today about our role in Iraq. And I got to thinking about this. I read a lot. And if you look back at what the United States has done in World War I, World War II, Korea, the Vietnam War, and so forth, and then you look today where Europe is safe today because of the United States policy and U.S. military. Look at the economic turnaround that Japan did after World War II. Look at where Korea today. I've read recently that South Korea has now become, and Seoul has become the model for China and Japan, because Japan's having some economic difficulties going and see. And all of these countries today literally owe and they've got wonderful, not perfect, but they've got wonderful systems of government. And all of this is based on the fact that men and women from the United States went into these areas of the world. I'm sure it was very controversial. That's what my mother told me. And the U.S. had to make very difficult decisions. And I'm not getting into the politics of this thing, but I do think the United States has a manifest destiny, like some historians have said. And I believe very strongly that we are the world's leader, and we need to understand that and accept that and move on.
Clyde, I hate to say it, we've run out of time. Those are amazing words, though. We'd love to get you back another time if you wouldn't mind.
I would enjoy that very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Clyde Merryman coming up next. You know, after 37 years in a job, sometimes it's difficult to move from one to another. It was those three great words: Federal Bureau of Investigation. That's 4 words, actually, but 3 key words: Federal Bureau, Investigation, Fidelity, Bravery, Integrity, and now Public Safety Director. Those tie in all so well. He's gone from 37 years in one organization, starting with another famous 3 words, J. Edgar Hoover, back in the mid-'60s, and a heck of a lot happening now being in town, Surfside Beach. Director of Public Safety is a big deal. You heard him talk about that aspect of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We didn't get to spend a lot of time focusing on Surfside Beach. There's a heck of a lot of things going on down there. Give him a call, 843-913-6368, to learn more. He's happy to share some of those early memories of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. If you've got a community group that would like to learn more, give him a call. If he gets some free time, he'll find a way to make it out there. Clyde Merryman, thanks so much for being with us.